most of you will probably know by now what a super fan I am of Kathy's. So I'm very happy that we have Kathy Ehrig with us today. So she's incredibly well known across the mining industry as a geologist, geometallurgist who has worked at Olympic Dam for over 30 years. But she also worked at the US Navy prior to completing her PhD and coming to Australia. So this is going to be such a good session as she takes us through her university experience and career journey since graduating from high school 50 years ago. So thank you so much, Kathy, for doing this. I cannot wait to hear your story. And yeah, very grateful that you've taken the time to talk to us.
Ooh, all right.
But before we get stuck in, I always ask the speakers if they've got any cool pet rocks that they'd like to show. So I was wondering if you had any special ones with
I do.
you.
Yeah, I do. I was going to dig some out, but sometimes projecting them
I like this. This is
be quite of a challenge. So Jessica did mention, first of all, that I've worked at Olympic Dam for a long time, and most geologists know that Olympic Dam is just a mega iron oxide copper gold uranium deposit. It's a breccia hosted one, but even almost 50 years since discovery, it's actually, there's still all kinds of little hidden things in there that when we look at drill core all the time and we drill and we look and just continue looking, there's all kinds of things we actually just don't understand. And that's usually the case of most of it. I'll just show a few images here and then we'll get into the part of the talk. But these are things that if anybody's got any opinions out there, that's always great too. There'll be 3 slides. On the left-hand side is a piece of drill core, and they're typically NQ diameter cores, so give you an idea of scale. And then the circular one is an optical microscope image of a 2.5 centimeter block, just so we get an idea about scale. And in this breccia hosted system that started forming about 1.6 billion years ago, there's these little tiny weird things that are in there, and we affectionately call them piezolites from our sedimentary petrology teachings and all of that. We know about piezolites. We know about these little residual balls that form all over the place. And laterites, they're quite common in a whole lot of environments. And when I worked for the Navy in geothermal side, when we would look when we were drilling geothermal holes, at the point where you go from a single phase to boiling, you get this flash that occurs, and instantaneous boiling, you get silica balls that form all over the place, very dissimilar to what formed the carbonates that form the carbonate reefs that we're used to seeing. And even before I started working at Olympic Dam, one of my colleagues had probably illegally, university colleagues pilfered a piece of core from a trip to Olympic Dam, and they had these cool little piezolites in them. And I thought, wow, that I was going to be able to study weathering a lateritic profile, because I thought they were lateritic related, something back at about 1.6 billion years ago. Man, I was thinking, man, I'm going to be the first in the world to do something on this. Well, I get to Olympic Dam, you start looking at some of these things and seeing some of the samples at the time and thinking, well, this is not a lateritic weathering profile. What is it? So the things what we'll show, and given all the different minerals that we have at Olympic Dam, up to 150 of them now, these piezolites sometimes occur in massive aggregates, like up to several 10 meter across in an exposure underground, or often just little scattered bits in drill core that we see. But when we look at them, they're typically dominated by carbonates, but it's carbonates with some magnetite and then hematite, but they can be fluorite, they can be uraninite, they can be barite, they can be, in fact, sulfide ones. And this is just going to throw a few snippets in it. So there's kind of 2 very rough ideas on what they are. My bias from my background says, these are just boiling zone, some fossil boiling zone that have been little bits and pieces preserved. But we know that the Roxby Downs granite intruded something, all intrusions don't intrude into a void, they intrude into stuff. And in South Australia, where we are, we've intruded into the Munta group, which has metasediments in it, but more importantly, it's got iron sediments and iron sediments that actually iron ore deposits type stuff. So one of the things is it some modified relic left over from the pre-existing crush, the Munta group, that the Roxby Downs granted and intruded into and started forming the deposits. The cool things that you see in here, they do really start off as carbonates, and they're iron-rich carbonates, but the carbonate composition can vary quite a bit from iron-rich ones to the more calcium-rich ones. Invariably, there's sulfides in them. And I said just about everything else we can see here. And then we just get some weird accumulation of minerals. So I have scoured the literature multiple times over and over. They're a common feature, or not say common. You do occasionally see them on in the other IOCGs around us, but nobody's actually adequately described what they are. So I figured someday when I eventually retire, I might actually do something with my collection of them. Now, these ones are just a beautiful example. So iron carbonate, you get the nice concentric bounding around them. They get deformed. Sometimes they're absolutely spherical. Sometimes they're squished a little bit. Often they're busted up, but multiple generations of things happening in them. So we'll just look at, this is one of my more favorite ones. I found a wall of it underground and collected it, and some of the hardest rock you could imagine. Now, this is another example, the beauty on the side. So a lot of time these little pisolites are, tens of mils, maybe up to 10 mils in size, even smaller. Sometimes you hit pisolites that are quite a bit bigger. So this, just an idea about the scale here. That's 25 centimeters, 25 millimeters long, if I got that right. No, 25 millimeters across this way. So you see these pisolites that get quite big, and they're almost like beautiful balls. Now, in this case, we can look at this image that came from cutting, not those big balls on the top, but on the back side of them, are typical little tiny pisolites, but then the big, huge ones. But this whole matrix in the background is just invaded with bornite, and there's a little bit of cobaltite and kerolite along with it. And again, you can see that these pisolitic material they've formed and they've been deformed, but what are they? I don't know. We'll just look at it one more, because I can just show you these things for hours. They're mesmerizing. Now, this one is an absolutely cool one. I actually found this piece of core on somebody's shelf in the office, and I suitably stole it from them, because when I saw this pisolites in this one, and it was from some underground core, it was quite interesting. When I made the polish section, this one is really important one. So when we think about Olympic Dam, and it's very famous for pyrite, chalcopyrite, bornite, calcocite, over 6 kilometers long. Having copper sulfide zonation is not unique to Olympic Dam. We know it occurs in porphyritic coppers, it occurs in sediment-hosted copper deposits, but at OD it also occurs. And it usually on the scale of a hand specimen, or even over a couple meters, you'll have pyrite, chalcopyrite, or you have chalcopyrite bornite, or bornite calcocite, but you usually don't get chalcopyrite, bornite, calcocite all in the same little bit. Now, this is really cool, because when I saw this, I got horribly excited a bit about it, because in one little tiny sample, I go from pyrite and chalcopyrite in the center of these cores, and as we go out, we start picking up bornite along the rims of it, and then it mixes into bornite calcocite. So again, this is just very low magnification view. And then there's another pisolite over here that's actually got bornite calcocite in the center of it. And these bright white things, that's just some pyrite sitting up there. But this is some bornite along with a whole group. So there's lead selenides, lead tellurides, that whole group of things that sit in there. So it's almost like my Olympic Dam sulfide zonation pattern in one little tiny snapshot. And it's important because we can go through and say, well, if we believe, but again, that's my bias, that these represent boiling zones, the conditions in those boiling change so rapidly as they do, where we go from precipitating pyrite, chalcopyrite, all the way up to precipitating bornite, chalcocite, and even chalcocite, and is preserved on that little tiny scale. So these big deposits, they're huge. We often get confused by the complexity of them, or confused by the complications of them. We won't say they're complex. We just have to be smart enough to unravel them. But the information is stored there. It just depends on how long you're around, or if you're lucky enough to hit on very, very critical observations. And that's probably been a key through all the work that I've done in geoscience all throughout my whole career, is having the persistence enough. A lot of times when we see things we may not know what they are, keep them in your mind, because someday you magically might have an aha moment at another place, or even looking at similar rocks around, that says, wow, I've seen that feature before, but can never explain it, and you might have a better exposure to do it. So I'm even back here, just write this down here for a minute. This is even bornite, this close to that chalcopyrite. So cool. So I won't get distracted by them, but if anybody has opinions about it, please do send me your opinions. Very keen to hear it. Now, we'll launch on to the little presentation. When I started to put this one together, I thought, well, plus 30 years at Olympic Dam, but they say, well, no, it's actually even a lot longer kind of event. It's been really 50 years, with it plus a few months, since I actually graduated from high school and then started my first university work. So it was a long time ago. And I love this image, because if I had all my time, I'd spend it looking at drill core at Olympic Dam. Drill core offers the best exposures. Microscopes, we can't live without them, even though a lot of people don't even know how to operate one of our little optical microscopes anymore. But then not forgetting that in my early days, I did a lot of field work. And this is pretty cool, and because in a modern sense, we're challenged by a lot of people that believe whatever's in Facebook, and realize that geoscientists are actually the best ones to understand how climate has changed throughout Earth's history. And we're not going to talk about the politics of whether humans have brought this on, but climate change is part of what we learn about all along. Now, so when we talk about history, or geological history, or understanding of time, geologists are best to understand it. Astrophysicists are too, and astronomers. But for us, a few thousand years is nothing. It takes millions of years before we get excited, and it's even billions of years, because that's the time frame that we work on. And this is in the White Inyo Mountains in California at about 11,000 feet. It's above the timberline and snow line. So it is kind of a desert at 11,000 feet. It does get snow on it during the winter time. But Bristol cone pines are some of the oldest living things on this planet. And some of the ages on these trees are 5,000 years old. So they've been in a hyper arid environment under horrible conditions, yet they still survive. And I just always loved going up there, because it took a long time to get up there. And the view that you can get into the Sierra Nevadas from there and across the other basin and ranges is absolutely fantastic. But it just reminds us about the timescales that we deal with. And as geoscientists or earth scientists, we actually deal with that quite well, And so it's fantastic. Now, and I pinched this from Jessica's at a SMEG event that was organized by Russell. But this lecture, even though I'm not the exchange lecturer anymore for SEG, it was from the last year's exchange lecture that I had the opportunity to go around and do it. And a career presentation was part of it. I gave this at the WinMet in Sydney back in February, but it's been modified significantly since then. So Jessica was all happy, because she was getting ready to go off to a Taylor Swift concert, Yeah. All right. Just a very quick snapshot here. When I first started university, I went to a community college system in California, and that wasn't full on university, but coming from a poorer background, I could actually take all the mathematics, physics, chemistry, astronomy that I needed anyway at normal university. And it was easier to go from the 2-year place into 4 years than going directly in. into university. And I also didn't have any money, you know, but so it worked out very well. But did that for for 2 years. I was married to a guy that was in the US Navy. He got transferred someplace else. Of course, you know, I was a silly young woman and went along, you know, just went along traveled wherever he did, which was great. And then I ended up working for the US Navy, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And I was doing not a military person. I didn't wear a uniform. I was a civilian there, and worked for the US Navy full-time for a while, and then part-time as I was finishing up the time I finished my bachelor's degree. But I did geothermal exploration and terminal ballistics, and we'll touch a little bit what an odd combination that is. Went back, husband got transferred again, got close to California State University at Fresno, which is in the Central Valley of California. And well, I thought, well, perfect time, go back and finish my bachelor's degree. So I did that. Finished that work. Then husband was getting ready to get transferred again, as they do in the military every few years around. And he went to San Francisco. And I did some geological contract work because I applied for doing my PhD. And all along, I had always planned, probably the only thing I ever planned in my adult life was that I was going to do a PhD, and then everything else would fall in line along with that. And it worked out that I actually got accepted at University of California at Berkeley. And there I did geology, chemistry, and some metallurgy. When I was finished, I actually had to go off and kind of get a real job then. And I was fortunate enough at the time, my advisor took it as his responsibility to ensure that I got a job out there, whether it be in academia or industry or whatever I wanted. And I was very lucky. I had about 8 different job offers, and one of them was to work at Olympic Dam. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And it was, how good could it actually get? So I started off at Olympic Dam as a research geologist, and then just very quickly moved, but it was doing more and more research and just other responsibilities associated with that. And those are just really title changes and just changing of the level of responsibility that I had throughout the time. So when WMC was eventually bought out by BHP in 2005, then I just went to BHP and have been working on geomet ever since. Now, we'll go back to some of the old drawn out pictures. Just to bear with me, I have my picture bar over here. I'm trying to get rid of it because it's annoying me, but I can't do it, so I won't mess with it. My personal background a little bit, and photos. These are some of the things I managed to dig out. I was born in Sacramento, California, in the Central Valley of California in 1957. I was the oldest of 4 children, and my father was an auto machinist, and my mother was a food and cocktail waitress, but she didn't become she was a work at home mother until my parents got divorced, probably when I was about 8 years old, something like that. Then she started working. She had to support the 4 of us. My father's family are city people, and my mother's families are country people. My parents both graduated from high school. My city grandparents graduated from high school, but my country grandparents actually didn't get beyond year 6. I think my grandfather made it to year 3, and my grandmother made it to year 5. But all of their children finished high school. I was raised in the city, but I spent a lot of time in the country because the country family was only about an hour-and-a-half drive from where we lived. The city grandparents taught me a lot about politics and carrying on and partying and all that. And the country grandparents, because the whole and my mother's whole family, they really lived off, you know, that their small farms or bigger farms, and shot a lot of food that they ate too. So it taught me a lot about the outdoors, and I dearly loved them, you know, and they were all completely different people, but they had profound impact on my adult life. My grandparents taught me many things besides a huge amount of politics, really. The consistent theme between both sets of them was anything that was possible as long as you worked really hard for it. And education was the pathway out of poverty, and the opportunity that did not have in a lot of circumstances, my generation started having that opportunity. So think of the generation in the US of the late 50s and early 60s. Before that, if you weren't born into a certain class of people or a certain level of affluence, you weren't destined, you were destined for and it's bad to say not great things, because people did great things, but the opportunities there were very limited. So a few pictures. People that know me now, I can be quite outspoken and cheeky, and I love to get into trouble all the time. Well, that started as a young person. I could never help myself even then, but I learned at a very young age. I could be horribly naughty, and as long as I got good grades in school, I could get away with it, And so you could be cheeky, but if you were a star in the class, so that was probably some of my reason why I always did well in school. Myself, and then my brothers and sister. And we were all 4 years apart. So my mother had us fairly young. Just a little snapshot at Easter time. And so since it was just recently Easter, I pulled that one out. Me as a very youngster on the local street where we lived. Unbelievably cheeky even then, I've been told. The remnants of a pillow fight where we shredded everything in my brother's rooms. And what I learned early on is to enlist everybody else around you, because when the mess came down, when you got done out and you were going to get caught sooner or later, you make sure you have as many people with you along the way so they could diminish some of the blame that you were going to take, even though you might have been the ringleader. This is just a picture of my mother and father. My mother was 18 years old when I was born, and my father was 1 week short of 18 years old. So they were very young. My city grandmother, she was 36 years old when I was born. So young mother, young grandmother, country grandparents are a little bit older than that. Now, a beautiful picture of Yosemite Valley at the Wawona Tunnel entrance. I spent a lot of time there. But I snatched this from their website recently, and a deep space image from the James Webb Telescope. By first grade, actually, I knew I was going to be a scientist. There was no question in my mind. Fortunately, I was a product of the public education system in California, and at the time, it was really good. I was fortunate to have great teachers all the way through school. I can still remember the names of the pertinent ones as time went on. I loved looking at rocks during the day because that's what we did out the country grandparents, and we slept outside a lot, even in the city. And the sky, was still very observable in the cities at that time, and even out in the country. So I'm flipping back to geology, astronomy, chemistry, because I like to blow things up also. I watched the Apollo space missions on television. I couldn't get enough of them. It was just everything surrounded. Unfortunately, the Vietnam War was also being broadcast all the time. So I think it was probably attraction to the Apollo stuff, just because it was a break from seeing the stuff about the Vietnam War. I completed my PhD I started when I was 30, and I was a senior age student at that time. I always laughed, 30 being a senior. And I finished it by the time I was 35. So I started a little bit later and had a different attitude going in. And I was lucky because was rated one of the best institutions in the world. And for me, the University of California at Berkeley and the whole University of California system was free to residents of California. And all we had to do was pay the semester kind of admin fee, which was $750. You had to buy your books and support yourself, but you didn't have astronomical tuition to pay. And the only criteria for getting into those places is what your grades were, and your family's social economic status actually had no bearing. And so fortunate, very, very fortunate. And I still consider myself fortunate. By the time I graduated, my one set of my grandparents were dead, but my other city grandparents were still alive, and they certainly attended my graduation. So this is one of me at graduation, my city grandmother and my principal advisor. Now back to the starting in university. 1974, my first geology course was historical geology. I loved it. But think in 74 and think when plate tectonics first started coming in, you know, the really acceptance or not in, you know, in the late 60s and early 70s, the guy that taught my historical geology course, he had worked in the petroleum industry and he did not believe in plate tectonics. You know, we had great field trips and all that, but he was not a believer. Things that were tools available, things like slide rules, you know? And for those that, yes, we used to use things called slide rules. One of my first courses, though, in university too, was you had slide rule classes, but I took a slide rule class in computer programming, and I had the last one slide rule class that was being taught at the university because programming and programmable calculators were starting to come out. Programming computers were really the big mainframes in the university, even though little home things were starting to come out. And punch cards were a way of doing it. So you write all this code, programming code, because all the scientists, you all learned programming. And punch cards were these big, massive stacks, and then every single line of code that you had in your program actually had to have a separate punch card for it. And that's how you got the information into the mainframe, whether it be that or a big, long ticker tape that we're used to, that we've heard about. So those are around. And if you dropped your stack of 3,000 cards of your code onto the floor, good luck putting them all back together again. But cool. Other tools that were available. So we often go back and think about this. The 70s and the 80s, you know, was really the explosion of all kinds of stuff. Programmable calculators and really the growth of home computers. One of my favorite calculators a little bit later on was the HP 11, and they're still around. You can buy them off of from Amazon and stuff, but a nice programmable calculator. I actually had Apple, and I love Apple products, you know, so I won't be ashamed to say that, but they were close to where I lived anyway. Programming around, you had to program a lot of the stuff. There were some inbuilt things, but it was still doing a lot of programming yourself. And those little tiny things here are holders for 5 1/4 inch floppy disk. So the capacity off of those things were 160K. You know, you think about that. And they evolved up to 1.2 megabytes. Now, look at our little USB drives these days have 128 plus gigs on them, and we can even get more than that. A hard drive that I bought from my Mac 2GS, I paid $1,000 back in the time for 100 megabytes of memory, you know, and I thought, wow, how good could it get? I could never, ever possibly fill all of this. We remember when the first Apollo mission went to the moon, our handheld programmable calculators had more power than the computers, the PDP-11s that were used in order to get them to the moon and back. So it's amazing. And I was always at awe on how they could actually get to the moon and back with pretty basic tools. Now, working for the Navy, out at a place called China Lake I was based, and China Lake is in the Mojave Desert of California. And there's a lot of military installations all throughout the deserts of the Western US. And there's just a few little snapshots. So big flat place, the valley where it was in, but it's just on the eastern side of the Sierras as you go into the Basin and Range province. And we were really between the Sierras and then a couple of valleys over Panamint Valley, but then Death Valley over from there. It was the place where the US Navy did the development and testing of their weapons system. Nellis Air Force Base to the south, you know, the launching of stuff for the Air Force and the Army had their testing range, and the Marine Corps did too. So the Desert West had a real growth in the military installations leading up to the development of the atomic bomb at Los Alamos for World War II. So a lot of these other places also built up at the same time in order to support that effort, really. So besides the testing facilities, the military flew the aircraft, loaded the bombs onto it, but there were more civilians that worked out there, PhD physicists and chemists that were doing all the development of these systems. Before a weapon that's launched from an aircraft, before the delivery system is developed, often the explosive part is developed and they need to do the testing. So they used to have this mile-long railroad track, and that's what the lower left-hand image is. and you'd mount your explosive device onto this rail, and then they just boom, accelerated into a pile of rock. And as a geologist that was working for him, one of our tasks was to go out into the local mountains. They were usually dominated by granites or some volcanics, and to find rock that you could build a structure, because they put weapon systems inside these rock structures and then blow them up. And so that was a lot of the work that I was actually doing. So terminal ballistics, it was called. But we also had to do is map a lot of, we also did mapping of old mining claims out in these areas, because they were heavily mined by small miners from the mid 1800s to up until World War II. This is just an example of the Kosovo volcanic field at China Lake. The guy that I worked for, I think it's the 70s, he actually convinced the U.S. Navy and the U.S. military, and the 70s was the first big oil embargo that was on, and the military, being the ultra-conservative organization that they were absolutely paranoid about energy supply even back in the 70s. So the guy that I worked for, the geologist I worked for, he understood the potential of geothermal energy, and convinced the U.S. military that they should invest in developing geothermal fields to ensure some of their domestic energy supply. And Kosovo Hot Springs, just where we were, actually had it. Me getting caught in a little bit of snowstorm coming back out of doing some mapping and not recognizing, when you're out in the desert areas, when you see big fluffy clouds roll across mountain ranges during late summer, you better move quickly, because you're going to potentially get snowed in very quick. Other interesting things that were out in these areas were the Kosovo Indians and Paiute Shoshone had migrated all from more than 1,300 years ago. So as the Pleistocene glaciation retreated out of there, the Native Americans moved in, and all these canyons that the military holding the grounds are at China Lake were blocked off from public domain. It was a good thing, because you had canyons after canyons that was loaded with these petroglyphs all over them, and walls and walls and walls and everywhere, and they were preserved because the military had actually blocked them all off. And they're national historic sites now, and have been for a long time. But it was fantastic looking at these things. So they're dated anywhere from 1,000 years old up to 13,500. A very big experience at working at China Lake, but I had to grow up, and it was time to move away and move on. And so that's when I commenced doing my PhD at Berkeley. And I have to, sorry, just keep an eye on time. When I was at Berkeley, the exposure that I had is being having top minds that you could be taught by and learn from. And one of the big things I got told early on is, let your mind be bold, not reckless, but bold. And that means you need to take risks all throughout life. You need to take risks, but they're calculated risks, and you know what the consequences are. But if you don't push the barrier, you're gonna survive and stuff, but you're just not going to be on the edge, you know. And it was always about being on the edge. And my principal advisor was George Bramhall, backed up by Hal Helgeson and Ian Carmichael. George was ore deposits guy. Hal Helgeson, a renowned thermodynamics person, and Ian Carmichael, volcanologist, you know, all over. And what they all taught me was, surround yourself with people smarter than you. You know, that you've got to worry about people that you work for that don't have smarter people than them working around, because you'll continually learn by doing that. And you certainly did. In university, always famous story, and you get it heard repeatedly. At Berkeley, it was very competitive there. And as a graduate student, as a PhD student, when we were first, you got set in a lecture hall that had, you know, for 300 people, and you got told, look to the left of you, look to the right of you. 2 of the 3 of you will be gone at the end of the first year, because there were so many people willing to take your place. They would push you as hard as possible to find out your grades were all good, but could you just survive that constant push, people on your backsides all the time to perform. And for me, it was the best training ground possible, because that hard work hard pushing in the university side. Nothing in industry could be like that. So it's almost a piece of cake compared to getting through my PhD. In the modern sense, we don't treat people that way anymore, because a lot of people fell by the wayside because they just couldn't handle the pressure that these guys put you under. Now, finished university, fortunate to had multiple job offers, accepted the one from Olympic Dam. And this is a picture of Roy Woodall. And he's the one responsible for getting me to go to Olympic Dam. He was the director of exploration for the WMC. He discovered Kambalda. He also was the one that first recognized that the bauxite deposits in the Darling Ranges were actually mineable and actually could be recovered. So he had a long history. Roy, along with his direct reports, now this is more than 30 years ago, hired and managed the careers of over 500 geoscientists that worked for WMC throughout the time that he was responsible for the geoscientists. He hired me and brought me to Olympic Dam. He would go around the world traveling to different universities and targeting people to bring them to work for WMC. My job was twofold: to determine how the ore body formed and then provide mineralogical support to metallurgy, which evolved into geomet. Roy had, at all of their operations, Roy had a research geologist set up everywhere, and that was their job, to understand the ore deposits so they could find more and to support metallurgy. As a company director, he allowed me to grow and to contribute to Olympic Dam, but I had to deliver. So even though he brought me there, it was no free ride. I was given the freedom to pursue what I thought was necessary, and he provided me unconditional support for almost 30 years, and long after he retired, he did. But he was a very challenging man, and there was no free ride. Always when he'd visit, it's the typical things are, what are you going to do about the problem? Because there was no having a winch to him. That didn't work. What do you think? When are you going to publish? What else can you do? Why does it matter to the business? And that's not what you told me last time I visited, because he'd always keep good records of everything that people would tell him, because he had to keep track of a lot of people. When I first started WMC and I went to Roy's office, it was in Adelaide, there was a picture of W.S. Robinson behind his desk. And on it, he had this quoted there. And I thought, well, this is pretty interesting. It says, "Go use science. Don't tell me what is, but you tell me what may be." So Roy was always chasing not the facts of what they are now, but what might be possible. And that's probably why he was a true explorer of his times and highly successful, and a man way ahead of his times too. Now, let me just ramp it up here a little bit. Other ones at Olympic Dam, picture of Henry Muller. Henry Muller, what I considered as a metallurgist extraordinaire. He was based in the Adelaide office, and he made regular visits to Olympic Dam to touch base with the metallurgists. So mentoring, yes. He first visited me at the mine within a few weeks after I arrived. And at the time, I was starstruck, Jessica. It hits some of the best of us at all times. I was starstruck because this is the man that developed the whole process plant, the flow sheet for Olympic Dam, and he was coming to talk to me who knew nothing about it. So I thought, wow, how good does it get? Henry was always generous with his time, but always willing to explain metallurgical concepts to a geologist. And I continued to learn from Henry up until the time he died. And later on in his life, he was recognized by, the picture here is him by BHP for his development of the flow sheet at Olympic Dam. And he was quite chuffed by that. And I owe my knowledge of metallurgy and the importance of linking mineralogy and metallurgy to Henry, and that little bit of time, that effort he would spend every time he came to site to touch up with us. So mentors, you can never pass them up. Early on, I wanted to do all my work. I wanted to do all the advances myself, but you rapidly learn, and it took me a long time, that I can do a lot of things on my own, but if you do them quicker, or you could have more people helping you, the quicker you can get stuff done, the more you can do. So we'll talk about the discovery team in a minute, but the images on the right-hand side and then across the bottom are various colleagues that I've been exposed to. Ken Cross was actually a company WMC geologist and absolutely brilliant, still is absolutely brilliant. And I was hired to replace him at Olympic Dam because they wanted to move him someplace else. And he always shared openly everything he knew about the deposit and still continues to do that today. Dima Kamenensky, the other guy there, a very famous mafic petrologist, really, or mafic ultramafic petrologist. And so that's why I touched base with him. Images down low is Maya, who's Dima's wife, who is an extraordinary geologist on her own, and Jocelyn McPhee, a volcanologist. Other colleagues and very tight relationships with these two, and or those three, and then a couple more, Nigel Cook and Christiana Charbonneau, who are really on the micro mineralogy side and micro mineralogy side. So throughout time, I've benefited by having close working relationships with these various academics. In 2013, had the privilege of bringing the discovery team of the ones that were still left up to Olympic Dam, and that's just at the old collar for RD1, the discovery hole for the deposit. All the work that we've published, and we've published a lot of works really since about 2010 Olympic Dam. There was stuff before I got there, but I didn't do anything, publish anything for a long time. And we were supported by WMC and BHP, later BHP, the ARC, Australian Research Council, the government of South Australia, and various grants and stuff, and all the people that have been part of the journey along the way. But the most important thing is, as geoscientists, we build on the shoulders of people that have come before us. And Olympic Dam, there's been more than 150 geoscientists that have worked on that deposit since the discovery. Most of them mine geologists and fantastic mine geologists, but not the opportunity to do much beyond this mine geology test that was required of them. So a wealth of stuff, and again, not possible when you do want to do the stuff on your own. A little bit on industry standards and looking, I'm pushing my time limit here, Jessica, I think. Industry, when you look at the picture like this, and we'll think in a modern sense, oh, things are horrible, Nah, look at that. That's a drill rig from late 1976 at Olympic Dam. I'm surprised that one of the guys actually had a hard hat on. Wearing that much clothing was very typical, particularly when it was stinking hot. We think about sun exposures, no guarding on things. And as modern safety things, we'd go through that and just pick that apart. But those were the conditions that the guys worked back in, 50 years ago. And we have changed dramatically since then. Does that mean we don't have improvements still to make? Absolutely, we have improvements to make, but it's been a long journey to get there, and it really has changed. And it not only has changed on the working conditions, but some of the first females that went underground in Australia were my generation, of Australian women that did that. When they went to go on maternity leave, they were not even allowed to take sick leave because becoming pregnant was considered a willful act. And as a willful act, you could not even use your sick leave to go have children or to take time off when you were pregnant or anything like that. There really wasn't such thing as part-time work for professional women. That just didn't happen. So things have changed, they really have. So as an economic geologist with a strong research slant, how good could it get? You'll say 30 years at one place. Your brain must be dead. I hope not. But Olympic Dam, is without one of the largest deposits in the world, yet most challenging. The processing plant, compared to across the industry, is also one of the most complicated. The surrounding province, host to Olympic Dam and other IOCGs, sits at a minimum of underneath 350 meters of cover rock. I've been able to work within and outside of BHP with strongly motivated people who are leaders in their disciplines, no matter where you go. We work in an environment where I'm allowed to pursue what I think is important to the business, but there's a price to pay for that. I've been able to have weld influence, and I've had the support of every asset president at Olympic Dam. And I always say some required more convincing than others, but we've always had their support. And I've always been able to publish and present our advancements to our scientific and industry peers external to BHP. And it's all about that external communication that's important. I've never considered working anyplace else once I started working at Olympic Dam, even though there's been heaps of opportunities to do so. But giving all those above, and given that I'm really a research person at heart, why would I go any other place? That doesn't mean I don't look at other deposits. Absolutely. That doesn't mean we haven't done other projects at other deposits. Absolutely. But Olympic Dam is still the coolest thing on the block. So my career development, it was 100% the responsibility of me. And this is for the way I see how I like to think others should see it too. That you have to own it. You need to determine what you want to do, not what somebody else wants you to do. You should seek the advice of people you respect and use the resources that are provided to you to advance your career or to advance your learnings. It's all about you, and you actually have to own it. And finally, it is team achievements, and this is my team here, minus 2 that I haven't updated my image. It's our achievements of a group, and the geoscientists that come before me. And I present here today, and I present our work because of the support that they do in the background. And it's just not possible if you're on your own. So I think that's all that I had, Jessica. Yes, it is. And thank you.